What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. You guys said that you really liked Tuesday's video where I went over the players who have risen the most in my rankings over the last 2 weeks. So I will definitely be making that a series. And today we'll be looking at the other end, the players who have fallen the most in my rankings over the last 2 weeks. Before we start, I want to shout out the website. We've got a bunch of information over there. Even if you don't want, the rankings, targets, sleepers, all that stuff, there's still a bunch of data that I'm sure a lot of you would really enjoy as well. So it's thefantasyfootballadvice.com. All right, let's start things off with the stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was among wide receivers with at least 20 third down targets who had the lowest third down catch rate. The answer was Marquez Valdes-Scantling. That's a lot tougher than we usually do. No one's gotten it right yet. Maybe someone will, but we'll have to see on that. Today's stat was among wide receivers with at least 80 targets who had the highest ADOT. So let's take a look at people who have fallen the most in my rankings. The first player up, and we're going to go in order of my current rankings. So you see the far left column. That's going to be Dalvin Cook. And of course, this is because news broke that he'll be holding out if he doesn't get a contract extension. So when you combine that with the fact that he already had increased injury risk, it's just not worth taking him as early as I had him. You can see I have him at 12th overall now, but he's one of the only early round picks, or at least at the running back position, I do not have as a target. So remember I said way back in that running back video that Derrick Henry was the only running back in the top 10 that I don't have as a target. Now there are two. Just Derrick Henry and Dalvin Cook are the only two until he signs. And then we'll move him right back to where I had him. But it's just not worth taking that risk. There are plenty of elite options in that first and second round. Next up is Juju and A.J. Brown. And I'm sure a lot of you are confused by my dropping of these two because you know that I like them. I wouldn't look too much into this. I still have both of them listed as targets. Both are still ranked at or above ADP. I just had them a little bit too high for their most likely outcome, so I moved them back a little bit, and I did move some running backs ahead of them as well, so it wasn't only wide receivers going ahead. And I honestly think Calvin Ridley was the only receiver I moved up over those two because I really like Calvin Ridley. But it was Calvin Ridley, there's a few running backs. So overall, still like them. Still, like I said, have them as targets at or above ADP, but a little bit less of values than they were before. This next grouping is like Keenan Allen, AJ Green, T.Y. Hilton. They are not targets. Technically, I have AJ Green above ADP, but I do expect his ADP to go up once we get into camp. People see that he's healthy, and they're like, all right, yeah, I think I can start drafting him. Right now, like I said, he's above ADP, but I don't expect that to happen once drafts are actually happening. I think Keenan Allen is fine to draft. I'm not upset if any of you draft him. He's an elite wide receiver, and there is a chance that whoever ends up being the quarterback for the majority of weeks leans on him because of his incredible ability to just get open. But it's a fairly low upside pick because it's kind of looking like the best case scenario is that he either returns value or barely gets above that, given the volume we expect from this offense. And if that's the case, it's not really worth taking him. If his best case scenario is he only beats his ADP by a few spots, why are you targeting him? So not a target, not someone I'll probably be drafting. Sort of the same thing with T.Y. I don't hate if you draft him, but I have him a good amount below ADP right now, and that's just because he's got the new quarterback. They want to run the ball a lot this season, and Pittman is there as a more stable wide receiver too. So Hilton doesn't have that same ceiling he used to have. Because of that, I don't really want him ahead of some of the other receivers in that range. And then finally, it's AJ Green. I moved him down because I was too high on him, and I'm still above ADP, like I said. But there was no reason to have him and this whole grouping above Metcalf, McLaurin, Chark. I think all of those guys definitely deserve to be ahead of these three. So I went ahead and just dropped them a little bit. Don't look too much into the Darren Waller drop. I did move him behind Mark Andrews. You guys know from a video earlier this week, I am warming up to the idea of targeting Mark Andrews in those like early mid rounds. But this was mostly just Waller was too high. I can't see myself spending a 5th round pick on him, and that's kind of where I had him ranked before. So I moved him back into the 7th round, which I think is a much better spot. It means that I probably won't get him on any teams, but I am comfortable with that because there are so many late round tight ends. I don't think I need to be drafting Darren Waller. I did drop CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy a good amount. Lamb, that drop corresponds to, you saw in the Rising video, Michael Gallup I brought up in the rankings. And of course, if I bring Gallup up, I need to bring someone down on Dallas. I was just a little bit too high on Lamb. I don't think all of Cooper, Gallup, Lamb should be ranked inside the top 30. I think that's a little bit aggressive. But even moving Lamb down to the wide receiver 35, that's still 8 spots above ADP. So he is for sure still a target for me. And remember, like I said in the mock draft video this week, even though I have Gallup and Lamb as targets, I would be very hesitant drafting both of them on one team. So go into the draft kind of favoring one of the two. I don't really care which one. I like them both kind of the same. But if you end up getting Gallup, I would no longer be targeting Lamb. And if you miss out on Gallup, I still do like taking Lamb after that as a consolation prize. As for Jeudy, it's actually the same thing. I moved Sutton up a little bit, and it, I don't know, it just looked like, looking at his metrics from last season, that I was a little bit low on Sutton, but people are still too high. So I have mentioned Sutton as a guy I'm fading this season. That has not changed. Even though I've moved him up a few spots, I do not believe I would draft Sutton in any leagues. But if I'm going to move Sutton up, I'm going to take Jeudy down a little bit. And this is just like Lamb, I do still have Jeudy above consensus. Although it's worth noting I have not taken him in a single mock draft, and I don't think I would be taking Jeudy in a league. So Lamb I'm cool drafting. I'm probably not going to draft Jeudy, at least right now, but we'll see where his ADP ends up. I did move Austin Hooper back about a half a round, just because, I don't know, I was looking at it and I don't even think I've like considered drafting Hooper. And the main reasoning is just, you know, he's going to Cleveland, right? And that's not like a bad situation. Cleveland's going to be a good offense. They've got a good young quarterback. It's just the downgrade, right? He's going from just this perfect situation in Atlanta where they're throwing the ball a million times a game. He's got a fantastic quarterback. It's like, say what you want about Baker. No one's going to argue that Baker is better than Matt Ryan, right? Like Matt Ryan's a better quarterback. And so when you go from a team who's, like I said, throwing it a ton, throwing it a lot in the red zone, he was targeted a lot in the red zone with a great quarterback. It's just a big downgrade, and I don't think that's playing enough into his ADP. Plus, you know, it's his first season with the new team, and like I said with Darren Waller, there are plenty of tight ends going late that I like as well, so I don't think it's worth taking Hooper. So that's why I moved him down a little bit. Next up is Cristian Kirk, and honestly, I did this because like I don't think I've considered drafting him a single time in these mock drafts. You know, there's nothing that I have against him. I think he's a really good receiver, but he's not DeAndre Hopkins. And I think they're going to use the running backs a lot too. And so I just, whenever I get to a pick and he's on the board, I just never see a scenario where I'm going to feel good about starting him in my starting lineup on a team like say I'm in the playoffs right now. Okay? It's week 15. I really need a win to get to the championship. Am I starting Cristian Kirk? I think it's highly unlikely that I would ever do that unless DeAndre Hopkins was injured. And I'm not drafting a wide receiver handcuff in the early 8th round. So I like where I have him now a lot more than before. And I don't think I will be drafting him this year. Next up, we have Marvin Jones, Mike Williams, and Brandon Cooks. They all get a very small bump down, not a huge change. This was only because I moved up John Brown, Anthony Miller, and Jamison Crowder, plus a few tight ends ahead of them as just like a chunk. I just kind of moved that chunk up, so that made Jones, Williams, Cooks all go down. And it honestly is just more about that chunk that I moved up. I just liked them. I wanted more people to draft them, so I moved them up a bit. And those were players I was targeting. I'm not really targeting Jones, Williams, Cooks. They're fine, but Jones is probably the only one that I would even consider taking late. But even him, I mean, he gets hurt like every single game, it feels like. And even in his very few good seasons from a points per game standpoint, it mostly comes off 1 or 2 monster games. And I know everyone hates having that debate. They're like, you can't discount those because they happened. I get it, but they probably happened on your bench. This isn't a guy like Tyreek Hill where you're like, yeah, he might have some down weeks, but then he's going to have these blow-up games, and they were in your starting lineup. A lot of these games where Marvin Jones blew up, he was on people's benches, and so that doesn't help. That just hurts you emotionally. So frustrating guy to own, and I'd rather just go elsewhere with those picks. Justin Jefferson sees a big drop, but I do still have him as a target, and he is still ranked a good amount above ADP. I just realized that no one was taking him even near as early as I had him ranked, so there's no reason to have him ranked that high, right? Like, I don't need to be 30 spots above ADP, right? You only need to be like 10 spots above ADP. People still take him. So realistically, I still have the same take. I think that he steps right into that Diggs role. He's got basically no competition behind him, and his numbers are just going to depend on how good he is. You know, can he command the same amount of targets as Diggs? I'd say that's wishful thinking, but can he command like 80% of those targets? Maybe. And if that happens, he's a really good pick where he's going right now. So still like him, still have him as a target, but he was a little bit too high in the rankings. Last guy we have is Dallas Goedert, and I moved him behind Noah Fant and Mike Gesicki. Still think Dallas is a good pick for the upside, but I do prefer those two ahead of him. Goddard played really well down the stretch last season. Got nearly 70% of his targets over the last 8 weeks, including 22 over the final 2 weeks and then 8 in the playoff game. That's great and all, but you gotta remember that, one, this is the last thing people do remember, so they think that's what they're gonna get the whole season. But you have to remember that everyone was hurt, right? So he was playing as the backup tight end 100% of the snaps over those last 3 weeks, or like 99%. So that's probably not going to happen again. You know, they're not going to have every single receiver on the roster get injured and just need to play him every snap and need to target him a ton. The more likely scenario is that he drops down to like 70 or 80%, which is still good. And it's honestly probably where like Fant and Gesicki are going to be. But it means that Goddard's going to have a lot more of those like 4 for 40 games, because remember who he is. They'll use him in the red zone, but he's not really a big yards per target guy. So he needs these games with like 10 or 12 targets just to get to these like 60-yard, 6-reception games, right? Because he had all these targets last year, especially down the stretch. He only went over 70 receiving yards once. So, like I said, he needs all those targets just to put together good games. And I love the upside, like I said at the beginning, if Ertz gets injured. But let's be honest, last year was probably the best case scenario for Dallas Goedert, and I just prefer the ceiling on Fant and Gesicki a little bit more. So that's why I moved them ahead. So those are the players who have dropped the most in my rankings over the last 2 weeks. You guys have indicated you really like the series, so I'll be doing both of these videos every 2 weeks, and we'll kind of keep track of what players are moving up and down the rankings along the way. That's the end of this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting that like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new? But thanks for watching.